I've been reminded to ask people to turn their cell phones off. Thank you, Ed. Okay. So my name is Michael Goldberg. I have the honor of welcoming all of you to our Henry and Elaine Kaufman Center for Jewish Living inaugural event. Our Kaufman Center's mission is to host a wide variety of programs, including inspiring authors, outstanding performers, and visionary educators that we believe will enrich the Jewish lives of our membership as well as the lives of our neighboring Jewish communities. The Kaufman Center's intended goal is being fulfilled by author Dan Grunfeld's acceptance of our invitation and your terrific turnout this afternoon. Without your participation, our quality program would be for naught. Not only does Dan's book, By the Grace of the Game, depict Jewish living, it defines surviving and thriving. But let's be honest, Dan, if we ask Walt Clyde Frazier, he would say that it's really a book about Jewish swishing and dishing. But you could counter and say, yes, Hungarian dishing. Dan Grunfeld was a two-time academic All-American as a member of the Stanford University men's basketball team. Dan played 8 professional seasons in top basketball leagues around the world, including a year in Germany, 3 in Spain, and 4 in Israel. He also played in the NBA with the New York Knickerbockers. In his book, Dan expressed how extremely proud he is to have added a gold medal as the captain of the U.S. men's Maccabiah basketball team that he competed internationally in Israel. And that's why I wore this Maccabiah hat as a tribute. Mr. Grunfeld earned his MBA from Stanford University, and his writing has appeared in media outlets including Sports Illustrated, Huffington Post, Jerusalem Post, and SB Nation. The following book review of By the Grace of the Game, written by the Jewish Daily Forward, fully captures the essence of Dan's writing style with the following, I quote, "Multi-sensory descriptions as the pain of torn ligaments, the sound of fans yelling, and the all-encompassing delight of Grunfeld's grandmother's Hungarian food help make the prose beautiful and nuanced. Grunfeld weaves his Jewish heritage and linguistic understanding into the book with a strong grasp of historical context. If I may humbly add my review by saying Dan's book made me laugh out loud, at times bringing tears to my eyes, while it made me proud to be Jewish on so many levels." Dan, would you have ever imagined when you were in our Hebrew school that you would be here in the Kaufman Center? And I really think that today's event was a b'sher for you and your family. Jack will be leading the interview. Jack and his wife Lydia have been members of our synagogue for 43 years. They know Dan Grunfeld since he was 5 years old. Not only does Jack have a long congregational connection to the Grunfeld family, he too was an All-American athlete at the University of Cincinnati, competing in swimming. As a 17-year-old New Jersey state champion, he was also a medal winner on the USA men's swim team in the Maccabiah Games in 1961 and 65. Our Kaufman Center committee felt Jack would be a natural to interview Dan on behalf of us today. Following the interview, we will have a Q&A session. The microphone to the right on the floor is where you queue up and ask your questions. And then following the Q&A, we will have our president, Elena Green, come up and give some closing remarks. So please give our longtime member, Jack Zakum, and our former student, Dan Grunfeld, your undivided attention. Dan?
Thank you. Thank you.
So, Dan, let me turn on my mic. Thank you.
Gotcha.
Can you hear me? I guess so. So, Dan, for some of us here who may not have read the book, let's start by telling us a little bit about the book.
Sure. I'll do that. First of all, thank you so much for having me in this wonderful introduction. As was mentioned, I grew up in Franklin Lakes, so we were members here when I was a kid. I attended of course, Hebrew school here, and it's having so many great memories. So it's really wonderful to be back. Let me spend about 5 minutes. Is that good, Jack? Just telling a little bit about the story? Am I on the clock?
Well, you already used up 30 seconds.
Let's go. Thank you for that. I'll jump right into it then. My family's name is synonymous with the game of basketball, as was mentioned. I had a nice career at Stanford, a successful professional career as well, but it's really my dad who brought basketball into our family. My dad's name is Ernie Grunfeld. He was a player for the New York Knicks. He was an executive for the New York Knicks. He was a high school basketball All-American out of Queens, New York. He was a college basketball All-American at the University of Tennessee, and he was a longtime NBA player and executive, and that's fairly well known, but what wasn't well known until my book came out is that my dad is the only player in NBA history whose parents are Holocaust survivors. I did a year and a half of research preparing to write my book, and that research suggests that he's the only athlete in any of the major American sports leagues whose parents are Holocaust survivors. And so for me as a kid in Franklin Lakes, growing up with big dreams of playing in the NBA, I always knew what the game had done for my family. So for me, it was always more than a game, despite the success that I had as an athlete and certainly the incredible success that my dad had. It's really my grandmother who is the star of our family and the star of the story. For anyone who's read the book, you know that to be true. My grandmother survived the Holocaust in Budapest. You'll all be happy to know she's 97 years old, lives in the Bay Area. I talk to her every day. The food that I write about in the book very lovingly, I'm still eating. I spent the weekend with her before Thanksgiving, and she was cooking me all the meals that I love, and so she's doing amazing. I often say she is not only my hero, she's also a hero, and it's the truth. I'll tell you a little bit about her survival story in Budapest, and it was mentioned a little bit in the introduction. I went to great lengths in the book to describe what life was like before the war, because we know the numbers of the Holocaust, right? 6 million Jews killed and millions more, but these aren't just numbers, these are human beings, these are people, and so it was really important for me to tell their stories and for the reader to understand that these are humans, these aren't just numbers. And so my grandmother was born into a big, happy Orthodox Jewish family, so she had 9 siblings, so there were 10 of them total, 2 loving parents. And my grandmother happened to be visiting an older sister in Budapest when the Nazis invaded. And so so when she was in Budapest and the Nazis invaded, my grandmother and her sister got a letter from my great-grandfather. As soon as they invaded, it said, "Come home immediately." And so they packed their suitcases and they got ready to go to the train station. And the following day, they got another letter from my great-grandfather, and all it said is, "If you can, stay where you are." And that was the last communication that my grandmother ever had with her father. He was taken to Auschwitz where he was killed. His name was Solomon Samuel, and my oldest son's name is Solomon after him, right? And that's the Jewish tradition, to name children after loved ones and to carry that history. And we'll talk more about it. I carry the history of a loved one who's gone too soon. And so my grandmother still says it was that second letter that saved her from Auschwitz. And so she had a chance to survive on the run. She hid in bombed out buildings. She found food wherever she could. My grandmother has every quality you would need to survive something like the Holocaust. She's disciplined, she's savvy, she's smart, she has a tremendous will to live, but she also has humility because she says you could have had everything back then and it didn't matter. You needed luck and you needed help. And she had both those things. You know, in the book you can read about a soldier who gave her an extra piece of bread when she was starving. Someone gave her a pair of pants to keep her warm when she was freezing in Budapest. Someone gave her a kiss on the cheek at one point, which gave her hope. The most help that my grandmother got was from Swedish diplomat Raoul Wallenberg. I'm sure many of you are familiar with. The Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. is on Raoul Wallenberg Way. He's regarded as one of the greatest heroes of the Holocaust, credited for saving roughly 100,000 Jews, and my grandmother was one of them. And he saved her life twice, and we can get into kind of a little bit more about that story. But my dad was born under communism in Romania after both of my grandparents survived. And just as a little context, my grandmother lost 5 siblings in the war, and her parents, and my grandfather lost everyone. And so that was the situation that my dad was born under, right? Under communism in Romania, the son of Holocaust survivors. He came to the United States in 1964, not speaking a word of English and having never touched a basketball. He spoke fluent Hungarian, Romanian, and Italian. My dad had an older brother who was 8 years older than him, and what my dad called my uncle in Hungarian translates to English as my king. That's how much my dad looked up to his older brother. My uncle was diagnosed with leukemia a few months after arriving in the United States, and he passed away within a year. So that's the biggest tragedy that ever befell my family, and I'm named after my uncle. So that's the history I carry, and some of my success in the classroom and on the basketball court has to do with him. Because my middle name is Leslie, and his name was Lutzi in Hungarian, but Leslie in English. And so my dad was 10 years old. Kids in New York City made fun of him because he didn't speak the language. Parents are Holocaust survivors, have to work 6-7 days a week to make a living, loses his hero. So he went to the local playground in Queens, New York to make friends, learn English, heal from that loss. He started playing basketball. A dozen years later, he was standing on top of the Olympic podium as a gold medalist for the United States of America, became this legendary player, and so my book is called By the Grace of the Game. You can probably understand why.
Didn't hurt that he was 6 feet 6 inches tall, did it?
You need a little luck, like I just said, right? You need a little luck with everything. Listen, and my dad had a great career as an executive, and a lot of people now know him as an executive, but he was a transcendent basketball player in high school. He was one of the best players in the country, and he was a transcendent basketball player in college. As an NBA player, he was a role player, and he was solid, but he was larger than life in high school and college, and he would not have flown so far so fast had he not been moving away from such tragedy. And yes, very big, very coordinated, very competitive, all these things, and you'll know from the book there's something deeper driving him, right? Because the game for him was salvation. It gave him a place to belong as an immigrant. It gave him a sense of healing from my uncle's death. And so, of course, being huge very, very much helps, but there's something really, really deep about his journey and what the game has always meant to him.
And I'll add, because of course I know your dad, for the talent and skill and fame that he achieved, a very humble, great guy.
Thank you for saying that. It's true. He's an amazing guy. He's a great father. He's very humble. And if you read the book, you get this sense that he's a little bit withdrawn from that past because it is so painful, right? So I think that, the game for him was just, it shined its light on him when he really needed it. And so I think that his extraordinary success, it's very insular to him. He's internalized it all because it took him away from really, really hard stuff, right? And we were talking about, my cousin is here who, we were just talking about the family tree, and my dad never met his grandparents because they were all killed in Auschwitz. And my uncle passed away, and my dad was uprooted from his homeland, and these are hard things. So he's a naturally humble person, but I think maybe even more so by his background and how it's affected him so deeply. Well,
he clearly had his priorities in order, and it sounds like you do as well, Dan.
Thank you. Yeah. Jewish people, we're family oriented, right? Those are our values, and my dad is that way. My grandma still tells the story after the Knick game when they played and all the players were after the game, and they said, "Ernie, we're all going out, let's play and come out with us." And my dad in Hungarian said, "Don't say anything, because I want to go home to the kids," in Hungarian. And then he told the guys, I can't do it, but that's who he is. He values his family.
Yep. I would say that in the years that I've known your dad and your mom as well, I didn't know the details of his past. And so for me, reading a book, it was really enlightening. And then I read it a second time, and it got even better. So I thank you for that opportunity. But tell us a little bit about my question, because your 4 minutes and 30 seconds are up.
Was I on time, though? More or less?
I don't know, but if you went over, it's okay, because
cool.
It was fascinating to hear you speak about those things. But I'd like to know how the book came about, what inspired you to do it, and how you got your act together to make the time to do this with the incredible detail. I note that I learned things about your great-grandparents who you never met, and about your grandparents in the detail, and I'm sure you got some of that information from your grandmother, but how you retained it and then transferred it into the book was a tremendous value to me, and I'm sure other people that read it. So I'd like to know how all this came about.
Yeah, absolutely. So I love to write. And so when I was growing up in Franklin Lakes, my friends knew me as a basketball player because my dad did, and that's what I love. But I would come home from practice and I would write stories, I would write poems, and my mom always said, he's going to be a writer. She just had a sense that, because I love to do it. And that's really the first part. Like, a lot of people have asked me, when did I decide to write the book? And it's not a decision that you make with your head. It's something that for me was in my heart and something that couldn't really stay inside. Like I had to do this. And so as I was playing basketball and I had a lot of things going on in my life where it probably wasn't the right time, and I think things happen as they should, but once I retired from my professional career, I went to business school, I had a little time and space, I had to do this. This was something I just felt so strongly about, and that's when I started the research, and it was a year and a half, and so the detail that you mentioned, I really credit my grandmother. She has an extraordinary memory. Even to this day, I will have a question about something from New York, and when my dad was in high school, and I'll call him, I'll say, hey, what happened? I'll ask him a detail, and he'll say, I have no idea, ask your grandmother, she'll know. Like he knows it, she remembers everything, him not as much, but she's really responsible for that detail. But also, I learned a lot from being an athlete, right? The discipline, the determination, and so when it was time for me to write my book, after I did all the research, I woke up at 6:02 a.m. every day for 8 months to write the book. And people say, why 6:02? And I said, why not 6:04, right? It just was a time, and it was early, and so that's when I said it. But when I got done with my first draft, my wife told me how proud of me she was, which I appreciated, but really all I had was the discipline to get out of bed every morning and write. And that's was from basketball, and so all those things just kind of coalesced in my life, a real desire to tell a story, a love of writing, and just the discipline to get up every morning. And Jack, you swim every day, like that's part of the journey, and so I was lucky that I had those experiences that I could apply to writing, and here we are.
I have to do that.
Understood.
And at my age, I have to. When you get to be my age, you'll have to as well.
That's fair.
Did you have any research assistants or anybody help you with this project?
I had a lot of help. Anyone who does, you need a lot of help. But no, I didn't have any research. And actually, this is interesting because a lot of people ask me, what did your grandmother and your dad and your family say when they found out you were going to write the book? And I never said to them, I'm going to write this book. I said to them, I wrote the book. I didn't say anything to my family, which is we're very close. And this was so deep and so personal. I needed space in a variety of ways. And so I didn't tell them I was going to do this. I just sat in that room in the dark for 2 hours every morning and did it. And so I didn't have help in those early stages, but after that, my wife has been just extraordinary, and the things that she's helped me kind of troubleshoot with the book and the story, and you never do anything alone.
I know I felt like I'd been to Satumar and Mikula. Am I pronouncing them right? So
I would give you an A for effort, at the very least, but technically, no, so it's Satmar, but that's the like Hungarian way, and Mikula. That's where my dad is from and where my grandmother's from.
How did you acquire some of the miscellaneous data for the books? Like, I never knew Harry Belafonte was half Dutch Jew.
You didn't know that?
I didn't know that. I remember Deo.
Yeah, of course. The reason for that, so my dad didn't have anything under communism. They weren't allowed to possess things, and my grandfather got a cassette player, and that was the song that they had by Harry Belafonte. And writing a book is so interesting. You make 1,000 decisions, and it's the biggest research project I've ever done. So for instance, I talked to my grandmother, and she would share this detail about, we didn't have much, but we had this one song, and it's a nice song, right? Deo. And so I just research it, right? Because I'm relentless, and you know this from my book about how I approach my academics and my basketball. I'm not afraid of work, and that's always been our thing. Like I outworked people like as a student, as a basketball player, but certainly writing a book, I was leaving no stone unturned. So we all have Google. I just say, Harry Belafonte, let's read. Maybe there's something interesting. And I'm just turning over every stone trying to find interesting connections. And I saw, he's half Jewish. So that's a detail I put in the book. And there are a lot of instances, because my family story intersects with a lot of interesting things in history. I figured a lot of it out and how to tie it together just by being tenacious, and trying to connect dots.
So, Dan, while the true story of your family's journey is kind of like the stuff that Hollywood turns out, I understand that there was a real Hollywood twist in the book.
There's a Hollywood twist, yeah.
Tell us about it.
Sure. So I mentioned, my grandparents, of course, both surviving the Holocaust, and when I was interviewing my grandmother, doing the research for the book, which I told her I had something in mind. So that I didn't tell her I was writing a book. I said I have something in mind for our history. So I think that created space for her to be very open and me kind of to process it all. But so she survives the Holocaust, and then I remember asking, how do you go on? You lost 5 siblings and both parents. How do you possibly keep going? And she said, our instinct was to rebuild. Our instinct was to start families. And so that's what my family did. You know, my grandparents got married quickly. They had my uncle, then I had my dad. My grandparents spent 2 decades under communism after the war. And my grandma still talks about that a lot, how brutal it was. The Romanians are known for their brutality under communism. And my grandparents had friends who were jailed, tortured, or killed for making a joke, for having a little bit of money, you know, because in order to live, you had to transact on the black market to save up some money. And it was, I read in the book, it was illegal, but it wasn't shameful. It was the only way. My grandfather was quite good at it. He knew how to, you know, he worked at a store selling distressed materials. So, you know, you maybe sell short the customer a little, keep some for yourself. That's kind of how things worked. It took my grandparents 10 years to get visas to leave Romania. And by the way, Jack, you know, because you read the book, it took my dad 24 hours to become an American citizen because of his basketball ability. It kind of shows you how things change over generations. But it took him 10 years. It was the state of Israel that paid money for each Jewish family that the communists would allow to leave. So my grandparents, my family had visas for Israel. Eventually, they spent 6 months in Rome, and they worked with HIAS, Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, and HIAS helped my family come to America. But initially, they were bound for Israel. When they were going to leave Romania, they were not allowed to take anything of value with them out of the country. Nothing. But they had saved up 4,000 American dollars and $1,000 worth of Romanian money. So they had all this illegal money. And, you know, my grandparents had chutzpah. They had survived the Holocaust. They said, we need to figure out how to get this money out. But, you know, the communists, they wouldn't let you take anything out. My grandma still talks about how they patted down my dad, who was 8 years old when they left, at the train station, screaming, do you have anything? So this was, you know, kind of dangerous, complicated stuff. I won't spoil how they got the Romanian money out, but they got every cent of all their money out. The Romanian money was not quite as dangerous, but my grandfather came up with a pretty gutsy plan that he executed, so they got their money out. But the American dollars, there were much more of them, and they were much more dangerous. Eventually, after my grandparents were racking their brains trying to figure out how they're going to get this money out, they elicited the help of one of the greatest comedians in the United States, a guy by the name of Buddy Hackett, who I know many of you know. And sometimes truth is stranger than fiction. My grandmother's cousin, who survived, who's still alive in Budapest, he was a production assistant on a movie set in Hungary, and Buddy Hackett was the film's biggest star. And so my grandparents said, well, wait a second, if we could get the money from Romania to Hungary, would Buddy Hackett take it back to the United States? He's a Jew from Brooklyn. You know, my great uncle had already settled in the Bronx. And my cousin asked Buddy Hackett, he said, my family, they need your help. They have all this money. They need to smuggle it out, essentially. Would you help them? And he said, if you could get me the money, it's done. And so how they did that was a whole other story in the book. My grandmother had to sew a false bottom into a suitcase, and they got it from Romania to Hungary. But Buddy Hackett got the money, brought it back to the United States. He sent it to my great uncle Andy in the Bronx with an extra $50 on top. And in today's money, that's more than $1,000. So it's really a gesture of kindness. And there was a note handwritten by Buddy Hackett, and all it said is, good luck in America, sincerely, Buddy Hackett. And so when my family landed at JFK Airport in 1964, they had a little money to start a life. There's a nice, neat bow tied on that story, because about 15 years later, once my family had made good in America, my dad's this big basketball star, my grandparents were vacationing in Vegas with friends, and they saw Buddy Hackett perform. By the way, my grandmother thought it was very crude, and she did. She says, oh, you know, she said, ugh. But she said he talked about his son's bar mitzvah at the end, and I like that. You know, it gave him, you know, a little bit, saved it a little bit. But after the show, they were eating dinner, or they were sitting at the table, and my grandmother told this story to her friends. You know, they never met each other. He just did this. And one of her friends excused himself from the table, talked his way into Buddy Hackett's hotel suite, and told him, those Holocaust survivors you helped, they're here. And they're someplace with the Knicks. You know, it's, wow, Ernie Grunfeld. And he said, send them up. And so my grandparents spent the night with him, and they talked and reminisced. And, you know, Buddy Hackett, of course, is an incredible, a legendary comedian. But for me, he's more than that, because he was really an act of kindness. And what he did, how he treated my family and giving the extra money. And so we turn on the news right now, and we see there's so much hate and so much darkness. But in my family story, it shows us there's always more light. And Buddy Hackett's a part of that. What he did was really meaningful.
Great story, Dan.
It's
So-
true, by the way. People always credit me for that, and they're like, I was like, hey, if I made it up, it'd be even better, right? Because it'd be so creative, but it just happened that way.
Truth is stranger and better than fiction.
That's right.
So, Dan, I realize that your father is the only child of Holocaust survivors that played in the NBA, or for that matter, in any other professional sports. But basketball in particular has a Jewish history in this country. I know from my experience, having been to the Maccabi games a couple of times, that the organizers never had a problem coming up with enough Jewish players that had some of the talent and that wanted to play. And so my question is, did that impact on you wanting to be a basketball player, not just because of your dad, but because they say it's one of the sports that Jews tend to have an affinity to. I remember Nat Holman.
Of course.
And it wasn't the first New York Knicks team, I think I read in the book, mostly Jews. So was that a factor in your inspiration, or was it all because you have size 18 shoes?
These are 16s, but thank you for noticing. Yeah, they're. So listen, I think first of all, the first game in NBA history was played by the New York Knicks and the Toronto Huskies, and all 5 members of the Knicks starting 5 were Jewish. The first basket in NBA history was scored by Ozzie Sheckman from Kew Gardens, Queens. So in the early days of the NBA, and certainly when basketball came to America, it was a very Jewish sport. It was played primarily by immigrants in the tenements of New York City. There's a very deep history I write about in the book. For me, personally, my motivations, there was a lot tied in there. I think when you grow up and your dad's an NBA player, you want to be like your parents, and it was just something that I always wanted. And I mentioned how the situation my dad was born into. And I write about it very honestly in the book. I was born into great privilege, right? I'm from Franklin Lakes. I went to Beth Rochon, right? This is a different upbringing than my family. My birth was scheduled around the NBA basketball calendar. And that's true. So my dad was playing for the Knicks. He had 2 long road trips, and I was delivered by C-section. And so my parents planned my birth, St. Barnabas Hospital in Livingston. So my dad went on 1 road trip. He was there for my birth. He went on another road trip, and he was there for my bris 8 days later. And I write in the book, a lot of Jews in New York City probably planned their son's bris around a Knicks game, but my dad was the only one playing in the Knicks game. So I think there was a lot of factors in my life that led to kind of my desire to be an NBA player, to be a professional basketball player. How Judaism plays in is because I always knew that my family hadn't been treated fairly. And I experienced anti-Semitism here in Franklin Lakes. I was at, maybe it was Fireman's Field, is that right? Yeah, I was somewhere like in Franklin Lakes playing with my friends, and there was a baseball diamond, and and I read about in the book, there was a blue baseball shed, and we opened it up, and there was a white swastika painted on the inside of it. That happened here. And I knew that symbol, and that scared me. And by the way, when I was at business school, as in mid-30s, our campus was defaced by black swastikas all over our signs, right? So bookended points of my life experiencing anti-Semitism. But I think as a young person, I just had that sense that we hadn't been treated fairly, and basketball was my outlet. It was my dad's outlet for different reasons, but that was where I kind of found a sense of peace. And so Judaism was tied into kind of that journey for me.
Well, you also played in Israel. You had a gold medal in the Maccabi Games. Did that impact on your Jewish identity? Very
much so. So when I played in the Maccabi Games in 2009, that was the first time I'd been in Israel. My sister, Becky, who you know, my whole family came, but that was her first time too. And after a few days, we both were like, this is life-changing. Just to be in Israel and connect with the Jewish homeland, where my family was supposed to go to Israel, and most of my grandmother had 4 siblings who survived. There were 5, including her. 3 of them were in Israel, 2 to the United States. So a lot of our family was there. And playing in that competition, competing with and against Jews from all over the world, that's not about sports really, the Maccabi Games, it's about identity. Sports is what brings us all together, but it's not really about that. By the way, we won the gold medal, which was nice, and my dad won an Olympic gold medal, but he won a silver in the Maccabi Games in 1973. So I could always tell him, like, you have that Olympic gold, but I have the Maccabi Games gold. But yeah, it was so meaningful. You know, I read about in the book being at the Western Wall, going to Masada, being with Jews from around the world who have congregated, and seeing, like, you understand the diaspora, but understanding like Israel is there to protect and preserve the Jewish people today as it was after the Holocaust, when my family needed it so much, and we still need it to this day. My dad wore number 18 for the New York Knicks as the only son of Holocaust survivors, and you know, my dad is. He's quiet and he doesn't talk about these things outwardly, but that tells you a lot that he chose to wear number 18. And I played for Jerusalem when I lived in Israel, so I played for Hapoel Jerusalem. So you know, the intersection and how deeply intertwined Judaism and basketball are in our lives is pretty powerful.
You know, we had Tal Brody come here to speak.
Good friend.
And of course, he spoke about the movie On the Map.
Sure.
And we had a nice turnout for that. And I coincidentally knew him from the 1965 games, and I hadn't seen him in all of those years. And if you played in Israel, you must know Tal.
I know Tal. So Tal Brody he went to the University of Illinois, and instead of playing in the NBA, he chose to play in Israel. He played for Maccabi Tel Aviv and led Maccabi Tel Aviv to the European Championships several times in the 70s. And you know, I played in Israel for many years, as was mentioned, and Maccabi Tel Aviv isn't just a basketball club, they are a national treasure. And it's because Tal's a big part of that. But for Jews to succeed on the international stage, there's such a sense of pride there. So it's bigger than sports. And he happens to live in Herzliya in Israel, which is a beautiful place. I also played there. And so I know Tal. He's a real gentleman. He's a very important person in Israel. He was also part of the '73 team that beat my dad in the gold medal game.
I didn't know that detail.
Not that I'm harping on that.
I know he was on the team that beat the Russians in that famous game.
Yes.
But I didn't know he beat your dad. Okay, I'll have to let your dad know that next time I speak to him.
I'll say absolutely.
So I'm going to segue into something that's been in the news and probably will come as no surprise. I didn't give you any kind of fair warning, but there's been a lot of criticism over Kyrie Irving's statements and criticism over how the Nets handled it or didn't handle it. And Ray Allen wrote the foreword in your book, and I've never met him, but just reading that, I was really impressed by his sincerity and the way he handled the whole situation. But have you spoken to him, or have you spoken to any of the people in the know about the Kyrie Irving situation, and do you have an opinion about it?
Definitely have an opinion about it. I haven't had the opportunity to speak to Ray Allen about it. Ray Allen is one of the top 75 players in NBA history, and someone I am lucky to know because he was a star player for the Milwaukee Bucks when my dad was the team's general manager. And Ray saw Schindler's List in college, and he was just moved. He said, this isn't just a Jewish tragedy, this is a human tragedy. And so he made it his mission to educate people about the Holocaust. So every time his teams played in Washington, D.C., he took teammates to the Holocaust Museum. And so there are so many things you can do when you're a professional athlete in a city, and that's how he used his time. And he's taken groups of children to Auschwitz. President Obama elected him to the board, or appointed him to the board of the Holocaust Museum in 2016. So I'm so proud to have had him write my foreword, and I admire him so much. I had his jersey on the wall of my bedroom when I was in high school. Number 34 Milwaukee Bucks, but as much as I admired and looked up to him then, I admire and look up to him more now for all the work he's done for the person he is. So I just wanted to give him a well-deserved credit.
But what do you think about the way the Nets handled the situation?
I'm getting there for sure. So how the Nets handled it, honestly, I'm less concerned about how people handled it. It's very complicated. I mean, ultimately, the owner made a strong statement. They suspended him. They gave him a course of action to try to correct the behavior, show remorse. There's been criticism. That's difficult. I'm much more concerned about the behavior and the impact that it has on millions of people, particularly young people who are impressionable and don't know better. There's a lot of talk about, oh, he just tweeted something, or like minimizing the effects of the behavior, but I think it's very serious and very dangerous and very destructive, the material he shared, and you have to be accountable to that. And the anniversary of Kristallnacht was a month ago, roughly, right? So we observed that. Prior to that, it was all rhetoric, it was all talk, it was all words, talking about Jews, stereotypes. And so there is precedent, and it's so dangerous to spread hateful messaging. And so I'm, of course, because of my family's history, I'm educated on these themes. I don't take these things lightly at all. And so I would have discussions with friends about, oh, but, I said, there's no buts. If you're sharing this really, really hateful, and for those of you who don't know, I'm assuming you do, but Kyrie Irving, the superstar for the Brooklyn Nets, shared a link to a highly anti-Semitic film and book with, denying the Holocaust, saying Jews are the devil, and there's a plot, all the really, really terrible, terrible things. And he has more social media followers than there are Jews in the world. So he was suspended. There were consequences, but what really concerns and frankly scares me is the effect that content will have on people who don't know better. So I think we have to take it as seriously as we can, and not take it lightly.
So what do you think the takeaway from your book in perspective to what's going on in the country today and Kyrie Irving incident, from the readers of your book, particularly the young people that read your book, what would you hope their takeaway from the book would be?
As it relates to this situation, I hope people take away from this book, one thing to take away is what is at stake when people aren't treated fairly. And that's why I'm of course very sensitive to it because of my family's background, but just in general, I was taught to be an ally. It's whenever people aren't being treated fairly, we need to stand up against it, and we need to take it really seriously. And that's why it's really upset me to hear people minimize some of the behavior that's going on today, because there's just never any room for it. So that would be the first thing. It's just to understand how serious words are, hate, discrimination, anything of that sort, to understand how serious it is. And also, and I mentioned it earlier, there's a lot of darkness in the world, there's a lot of darkness in this story, but there's always more light. And we need to be part of that. We need to be the good that we want to see in the world. So it's standing up for ourselves, standing up for others. Ultimately, this is a hopeful and inspirational story. And that's what I want people to take away from it more than anything, but to take these type of situations really seriously, because they should be taken seriously.
So when's the next book coming out?
Glad you asked that. I would like to write another one. I love to do it. I love to tell stories. There'll never be another one like this. This is my soul on a page essentially, and it's my family's story. But I would like to do it again. I think it's just a very powerful experience, and so I'll let you know. One thing I will say to this group is that, and you mentioned Hollywood movies, we did agree to do a documentary with a filmmaker, which is exciting, and so we've started doing some things with that and filming my grandmother cooking for me and different things, and so we're focused a little bit on that. And this story, it matters of course to me because it's my family story, but I always thought that it would resonate more broadly because it's my family's version of a universal story, which is overcoming adversity, it's uniting with family and staying together and just working through the things that happen in life, and the joys and the pains and the tragedies and the triumphs. And so I'm so pleased that it has resonated in the way I hoped it would, and I'm going to continue to see it through, right? So talking to groups like this, and we need to kind of continue to spread this one, and then we'll move on to the next one.
So Michael, are you in the room somewhere? You want to take over and open us up to questions? Open Dan up to some questions.
Is this working? Yeah. I would like to see you present your book and the story to every NBA team, because the silence, when Kyrie made that statement, for me, the silence was deafening. So would that be possible? And the thing is, it's not a question, it's just a comment on what Jack said and how you responded. I think it would be great if you approached Adam Silver and said you would love to, educate the NBA. Plus, Ray Allen, with the forward, it was a beautiful forward, but the Holocaust impacted his life, and I was waiting to hear from him publicly. But I know it's a very difficult topic. But I would love to see you talk to the NBA teams and educate them.
Thank you for saying that. I would love to do that, of course. That would be something that I'd be interested in doing. I think it would be important. But I agree with you that the silence was deafening, and there's always going to be someone who holds a viewpoint that maybe you don't agree with or that's dangerous. And actually, and I had said this, I did a couple interviews about these themes, and I said, I'm less concerned with Kyrie Irving, he's one individual, than I am with the response. And there were no active NBA players who stood up, and the NBA players have been they've been on the right side of a lot of issues, and I've been proud of their advocacy, but on this one, they didn't say anything, the players.
Okay, so here's a question. One, I don't want to monopolize the microphone, but if David Stern was alive today, would you think he would handle it differently?
It's hard to say. Listen, I have great trust, faith in the NBA's leadership as a league, Adam Silver all the way down. I think that they've been a leader in the community and continue to be. My concern is with the individual players more so. And so Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who's a retired player, he spoke up about this, and he said, well, why are we so quick to stand against hate for certain groups, but for the Jews in this instance, there haven't been many voices. And he said, if we don't protect everybody, we can't protect anybody, and that's the truth. And so I don't know what the answer is. I think maybe the education that you mentioned, and certainly if they wanted to have me, I would be there in a second. But it's been very troubling because my grandmother knows all too well, and she said, we needed there was a time we really needed voices, and there weren't enough of them.
Right. Okay, we'll open up the mic if anybody else has a question.
Wouldn't you know it, the tallest guy in the congregation?
Nice.
Dave's a 300 bowler many times over.
Thanks for being here.
Thank
You
you.
mentioned that for writing the book, that you did it in isolation. What has been your grandmother's and the rest of your family's reaction once they heard and found that you did have this book? Positives, negatives?
Yeah, thank you. Surprised at first, right? But a lot of pride. Very proud of me, very grateful that I told the stories. My grandmother, she'd always say to me that one of her biggest fears is no one would ever even know her family members existed. They have no graves to visit, they have no death certificates, they were taken to Auschwitz and they were never seen again. And so now their stories live forever through the book, which is very meaningful, and she's grateful for that. But it's been very hard. It's definitely hard for her. She knows, of course, the history, she lived it, but it's hard to go back. Very hard for my dad. Because basketball, as you see from the book, just took him away from all this. And it was a rocket ship. I mean, really, and he just got on it and he was off to kind of a different place, and he's never cared to look back. And I'm privileged in so many ways, and one of those ways, I have a generation of separation from all this tragedy. He was born from the ashes of the Holocaust, literally. I can look back on it and gain inspiration from it, and so I could tell the stories, but he doesn't have that luxury. And so, similarly, he's very proud of me. Friends email him all the time or call him that this person read the book, or this, so that part of it is fun, but very, very difficult for him. Yeah, but there's ultimately it's a great sense of fulfillment and pride from my family and happiness, and also that the fact that people like it and that people care about it. It's funny because my dad, he is so humble, and he doesn't, I joke, no one cares less about the story of Ernie Grunfeld than Ernie Grunfeld himself. And he had said to me, he's like, okay, this is our story, who's gonna care, essentially. And and as I mentioned before, I always thought that people would care and that it would move people, and it has. I've gotten emails saying, I have a family member battling cancer, just like your uncle did, and this has helped me get through it. Or just like these anecdotes, and I think we're all very pleased and grateful for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bob?
Hi there. So I'm going to give you some information, then I'm going to quiz you.
Love it.
Okay?
This is great.
So here's the information. Somewhere around 1990, I was in charge of adult education for a synagogue for here. And I asked your dad if he would speak on Jews in sports, right? His answer was, instead, how about I give a basketball clinic? Okay, which was great. So we had one. Here's a quiz. Your dad took 20 foul shots and about 15 shots from within three-point range, inside the three-point range, in order to warm up before the clinic. How many of those shots did he miss?
Did he miss? I'd say he missed 2 foul shots. How many other ones that he said?
15 from within 3 points.
He probably missed 2 foul shots in 2 of those shots.
Okay, he missed 0.
He'll like that. He'll like that. I got to tell him that.
I'm going to chime in because I was there. We used to have back in the, now it's the education wing, a little gym, and I was there, and your dad went around the room from the very perimeter, and everyone was swish. No net, perfect. We were all blown away.
And you know, from the book, I tell stories that when I was very little, he would do these clinics and he would take me with him and he would plant me in the audience and he would say, I need a volunteer to show how to shoot. And he would always call me up. You can read about it in the book. Because I was younger, you know, and people said, who's this little runt, you know, but I could shoot because he had taught me. So yeah, we did that little ruse a lot.
So one of the clear themes of your book is how, you know,
Can you speak closer to the mic?
how growing up the son and I guess grandson of highly successful people impacted your life.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've gone on to tremendous success in a variety of ways too. So what lessons have you taken from both being, you know, the son and, you know, potentially the parent of how to help kids whose parents have achieved things that, you know, they might not be able to do, and how to, do you understand what I'm saying? How to...
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
And you know, I'm very honest in the book about the pressures that I felt and the pressure I put on myself, and it drove me in a lot of ways. But I think if people ask like, would you do anything different or what have you learned? And I would have smiled more and just enjoyed it. And that's what, you know, I have kids, and that's the lesson is you have to enjoy it, you know, and I was so motivated and it meant so much to me, and that's all good to a point. I definitely exceeded that point. I think to not attach to the results, but to the work you put into the process, that's really what's important. And of course, you know that now in hindsight as an older person, you know, and that's the lessons you learn. To the extent that I can share these lessons with my kids and other kids, and I talk to groups of youngsters and I tell them, I always tell people, and I had the luxury of dreaming big because I had seen what my dad overcame. So I wanted to play basketball at Stanford actually, I write in the book, this happened at Beth Rashawn. We went around Hebrew school. I'm in Hebrew school here, and they say, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I said, I want to be an NBA player. And everyone laughed at me, which I get, right? Because I'm like, and I write in the book, it was a long shot for a slow Jewish kid from the suburbs to play at Stanford. Like, we had been to the Final Four, it was a top program at the time. But since I had seen what my dad overcame, I just had the luxury of dreaming big. And so I tell kids when I speak to them now, dream as big as you want, and you should, but you really just make a promise to yourself to outwork others, but also you need to enjoy it. And you know, and so that's kind of the balance, right? A lot of like highly successful people, not putting myself in that bucket, but I see some basketball players who have been really, really successful. There's always a cost to it, because you have to push so hard. Life is to be lived and to be enjoyed, and you need balance, and so it's kind of trying to teach those skills.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So my takeaway from that answer is tell everybody you love, smile more.
Yeah, thank you. It's much more concise.
Hi, Dan.
Hi.
I heard you speak for Solomon Schechter
Yeah.
on Zoom, and I was telling the committee who helped plan that when you finished, I wanted more. And for me, it hit really close to home because my grandparents are from Russia and Ukraine, and they survived the siege of Leningrad, and my parents came from there, and so I'm first generation American like you are. And, you know, I feel like we kind of relate in that sense that we both kind of grew up with that burden
Right.
on us, being told about these stories about our family and our history. And, you know, as far as I tried to get away from it as a kid, now I kind of find myself, you know, I'm making borscht for my kids, and I'm making kasha varnishke, you know, like things that were very traditional for them, that like my friends in elementary school would be like, what the hell is this?
Yeah, sure.
You know, so my question is, how do you kind of, you know, raise your kids with that in mind, but also not guilt them at the same time?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you for sharing the history as well. It's a matter of just educating and making sure they're aware of who they are and where they come from and what matters and the values, you know, that you inherit. And I think history can be accessible if you do it the right way. And I found that with my family's story, the way my grandmother always told me about what she went through. Some of it's really hard, some of it's really painful, but it instilled in me a great sense of pride.
Yeah.
You know, so I kind of rely on her example of just being open and sharing and supporting, you know, and for my whole story with basketball, like my family never put pressure on me. I put plenty on myself, you know, but I think it was just being very like open mind, open heart, and honest, you know, and also understanding that it is important. You know, for me, like I want my kids to know, I wrote this book so they can read the book and they'll know one day, but even if I hadn't, I would tell them about the family history because this is what they've inherited, right? So I think it's just being honest and open and understanding about those things.
You told a really interesting story, I don't know if you want to tell them today, about the clock with the money.
About
There was a clock that you told with the money in it.
the radio?
Or was it, sorry, it was a radio, yeah. You know, like my parents tell a similar story about how like there was a pogrom and they came knocking on the door and then there was a spoon left in the bowl and it was, you know, as is. So I just thought that was a really interesting kind of parallel.
Yeah.
If you want to tell that story.
The
Thank
illegal,
you.
Thank you so much. The illegal money that Buddy Hackett helped smuggle out, and also that the Romanian money they smuggled a different way, my grandparents kept it in an old radio in their apartment in Romania, and one time the communists just barged in because that's what they do, and they searched all their stuff, and they picked up this radio, and there was a lot of money in there, and they would have been in deep trouble for even having that. And the communist officer said, "Where's the permit for this?" And my grandma said, "We don't have it." And they threw the clock on the ground, and they were holding their breath, but it didn't open up. And then he moved on to the next item. And they said, "Phew," you know. So they dodged one on that. But that just kind of illustrates what life was like. The communists just barge in their apartment, search their stuff, throw stuff on the ground, move on. I mean, it's part of this story. It's really sobering to acknowledge what human beings are capable of doing to one another. There's so much, we have a tremendous capacity for love, but also for hate and for destruction. And so I think that's why I'm so passionate, and it means so much to me to try to stand up for what's right and try to be a force for good, because yeah, we can do some really bad things to one another. Thank you for your comment.
Hello, my name is Chani Jaskal. I'm from Teaneck.
Sure.
And co-chair of a Holocaust commemoration that we have every year in Yom HaShoah. And years ago, we would get 1,000 people to show up for our programs. As the years have gone by, less and less people come. I don't know if they're not interested, they don't think it's important anymore. I love the fact that you're using basketball as a vehicle to connect the Holocaust to today's youth. I don't know if it's enough, and I was wondering what else can we possibly do, because we always had a Holocaust survivor come and speak at our commemoration. I wonder if your grandmother would actually come also, because we need to hear firsthand the stories, the hardship, and the survival that they went through, and make it real. Because now our youth, it's just a story. It happened in the olden times. So I was wondering, do you have any ideas? How can you personally use your platform, your basketball, to get kids interested and more knowledgeable of what happened, and make sure it doesn't happen again?
Yeah, I'm doing the best I can. But what you say is, it's important, and listen, the generation of Holocaust survivors is getting much older. And when I lived in the Bay Area 5 so years ago where my grandmother lives, and my wife and I would take 2 carfuls of her and her friends to synagogue for the high holidays. And now my grandmother's the only one left. They were all Holocaust survivors, and that's the nature of life. And so it's always amazing to be able to have a Holocaust survivor come in person and talk to people. It's so powerful. If my grandmother was here, no one would want to hear from me, and you'd be right. Like, it's just a different experience. But that generation is getting older, so it's incumbent upon us now. And so this is how I try. You know, I wrote the book, and I try to speak as much as I can. One thing about my book that I'm proud of is that it's accessible for the younger generation, because there's a basketball story, and you know, the Holocaust is heavy, and so this isn't just a Holocaust book. It's not a basketball book. It's really a book about family. But I'm proud of that. And so I always tell people, like, get younger folks the book. Like, I've never said no to speak to students. I've always said yes, and I continue to do that. So it's just, for me, the way I try to contribute is telling my story. I wrote the book, trying to have it, you know, read and distributed by youngsters. And then I guess the last thing I would say is that I encourage people to talk about this history. You don't have to write a book, your family didn't have to be affected, but it's not something that can just be in the background always, because like you said, the attendance is going to go down and down and down and down. Like, this is all our history, so just for us all to talk about it and to remember it is really important. Thank you.
Hi, Dan. Hi, Jack.
Hi.
My name is Hillary Posner. I'm the preschool director here.
Oh, great.
at Shown. My question was, I have been going through Ancestry and finding old documents and family documents, and I'm finding them so fascinating. I found my grandfather's World War II draft card and things like that. But I noticed when I brought it to my parents, I was uncovering information sometimes that they were unaware of.
Yep.
And I did not receive the reaction that I expected. There was very much a desire to put a distance and not learn this information. Did you uncover information when you were doing research that the rest of your family was unaware of? And if so, was it difficult to bring to them, and were they receptive to hearing?
Yeah, absolutely. So I did uncover details that people didn't know. Just to address what you said, I think it's pretty common, the difference between like second generation, third generation, like when you're so close to it. And I mentioned a little bit with my dad, but that's a common thing. And I've read a little bit about it, like some of any research that they've done on it, and it holds, right? Like that, you find that in that generation. In my particular instance, yes, I did. I would, I went over documents. I found out that I had one great aunt who survived Auschwitz, and she was evaluated there by Dr. Mengele. And no one knew, I didn't know that, but we found out through this document. And my grandmother is more interested, but my dad, he doesn't connect with it in the same way I did, but that's probably for him a defense mechanism of sorts, right? Because he's lived his whole life trying to survive that situation of being the son of Holocaust survivors, being an immigrant, not speaking the language, so there's something really deep in him to probably, the safety is distancing a bit, right? So listen, I'm an armchair psychologist right now. I don't know exactly, but you know what I mean though, if I think of but so the answer is yes. I definitely saw that where I would find out this detail and I would think it was fascinating, amazing, and it'd be like, okay, I'm like, oh, okay, I obviously, it means more to me, but I'm actually not sure it means more to me. I just think it presents differently. And again, that's my privilege a little bit, maybe yours too, right? Where we didn't flee in the ways that they did. And so I think it's very, very complicated, but I'm with you because I think we probably had.
Was there anything you held back?
That I held back regarding details
from your research that you felt would just be too painful?
Me, nothing. Not a thing. And to my grandmother's credit, because people have asked me that, was there anything they didn't tell you? There were several instances where my grandma said, I don't want to tell you this because it's and I mean, these are things that are very upsetting things, but she said, I don't want to tell you this, but if you want me to, I will. And in every instance, I said, I have to know. And I'll tell you an example. This is more of a personal one, but when my uncle was sick, and we talked about a lot of things today. If you read the book, you'll know how my uncle passing when they were new to this country was such a humongous tragedy. And my grandfather was painting houses in Connecticut. That's the work that he did. They lived in the Queens, but he was in Connecticut. And when my uncle was really sick, my grandmother got in touch with him and said, you have to come to the hospital immediately, it won't be long. She doesn't know how, he didn't have a car, so he just got to Connecticut with friends, and he got to the hospital in no time. So she doesn't know how that happened. He took that to his grave. So I was asking my grandma about this. This is my uncle's last moments, right, which is really painful. And I said to her, did he make it in time? And she said he didn't. And so that was a crushing detail. It's in the book, and when people say they laugh with the book, which you will, they cry. My uncle passing is really, really painful still, but it was that detail that I had to ask that horrific question and I got the answer, and I'm not happy about it, but I'm happy I know it because this is our history,
We can't wrap history up in a neat bow, or we're destined to repeat it.
That's right, and I'll just make one comment about that. I've had some people say, even good friends of mine, because the book is done well and people really like it, but they're like, but it was hard to read. And that's not a criticism, but it's a little bit it was hard to read, and I'm like, yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
It's probably hard to write.
And it was. Because, like, listen, I was sitting in these moments of, like, my great-grandparents being murdered in Auschwitz, and that's what happened. And so, and I said that, like, publicly when people say, like, yeah, some of the details are hard, and I'm like, they are, and they should be, because you don't sanitize the Holocaust. And, like, I got a good piece of advice from a writing mentor. They said, when things are hot, write cold. Like, you don't have to dress anything up, you don't have to dramatize, but, like, you have to tell people what happened, you know, and that's what I tried to do.
Thank you very
So,
much.
thank you.
Appreciate it.
I appreciate it, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was amazing. Thank you. Thank you for being
Thank you.
Is that good? Can you hear me? No? Is that working? Okay.
Yep.
So, first of all, I have to say that I'm genuinely looking forward to the documentary. And like you said, to hear from your grandmother, I want to hear her. I'm looking forward
get
to
it.
that. I mean, I love hearing you.
No,
but
she's-
that piece of it, it will be tremendous. I
Thank
think
you.
that's amazing. I'd also love to see you talk on college campuses. You know, I have kids who are in that age range, and Michael talked about talking to the MBA, but I feel like talking to those kids, the boys in the frats, the college campuses, would just hit home, and you're young enough to connect, and the book connects, and the basketball, it's fabulous.
Thank you.
Thank you. So before we all go into the social hall for refreshments, I want to take the opportunity to thank everyone who helped put this event together. On behalf of Temple Beth Rochon and the Kaufman Center for Jewish Living, I really want to sincerely thank Dan for being here today and sharing his family's story with us. Thank you to Jack for taking part in the interview. Thank you to the Kaufman Center Committee for bringing us today's program and providing future events of this caliber. And also thank you to all the sponsors who help make this possible now and in the future. And thank you to everybody here in the audience for attending. It's so important. And I'd like to invite you into the social hall after for some coffee and cake and the opportunity to purchase a signed copy of Dan's book, By the Grace of the Game. I finished reading the book earlier this week and was completely compelled by the story and the beautiful way in which it was written. And I encourage everyone to add it to your reading lists. Lastly, for the Kaufman Center, please add February 12th to your calendars for our next program. And we will be hosting the bluegrass duo of Nefesh Mountain here at Beth Rochon. They are a local beloved band singing, husband and wife, singing Jewish and secular tunes, and that'll be an afternoon of music for the entire family. So thank you, and I'll see you inside.
Thank you.